Harda, Tailteann, Ben from Bite Size Irish here. Today we're going to have a special little chat about Aonach Tailteann. Now, if you don't know what that is, I don't either, but Niall O'Sheil, Bite Size's learning content developer, is here to tell us all about it. Tá fáilte wrote the Niall, Tailteann. Welcome, Niall. How are you?
Good morning, Timmy Bra, GD got dinner. Hello, everyone. Yeah, we were just thinking about this topic the other day, weren't we?
We were. So you were saying that the fact that the Olympic Games is starting shortly reminded you of this Irish tradition, Aonach Tailteann. So just to start with the phrase Aonach Tailteann, first of all, what does that mean?
Well, the first word is Aonach, and that might be a kind of familiar word to a lot of people. Aonach is a very old word that we have for a fair, a big gathering. A lot of people will come together. I suppose the word Ain for number one is baked into that word. Everyone uniting, coming together. So an Aonach was a word for a fair, a big gathering. You can imagine it was a huge social event. There'd be commerce, but there'd be social occasions, matchmaking, things like that. So that's an Aonach. There were lots of Aonachs, of course, around the country. And it'd be a familiar word to a lot of people from a couple of popular sources. There's a great old song we would all do at school. There'll be a fair tomorrow in County Clare, which is a great tune, I think. And the town of Nina in Tipperary is on Tailteann. That's where it comes from, that word Nina. So Aonach and Tailteann, they both come from this word Aonach, which means a fair. So when we talk about Aonach Tailteann, it was a fair.
And where did this fair take place? Tell us.
It took place in Tailteann. This is the locale. Tailteann County Tailteann County Meath is the name of the place in modern times. And yeah, there was certainly in prehistoric times there was a lot of activity. Well, in that whole region, of course, but definitely right there in Tailteann, there was something going on for sure. So this was Aonach Tailteann, the fair of Tailteann.
So whatever was going on reminds you of the Olympics. Tell us, why is that?
Well, as I say, it was a big gathering, a lot of people coming together, which I believe the ancient Olympics over in Greece were as well. But like the Olympics, there were games on. There were lots of sports and contests, competitions, and I think it was considered a very important part of the culture.
Very good. And so do we know what sort of scale this was happening on? Were people coming from all around the country? Were they representing themselves? Were they representing their locality, their tribe, or whatever way you want to put it?
I think it's hard to say. We don't have detailed records on what happened at each event or anything like that. What we have is references in historical sources and in the less historical sources to the stories as well. So you could get in the annals, there'd be a reference to, and the Tailteann Games, Aonach Tailteann took place this year as well. You know, that kind of, just a little reference. So we know it was going on. And in some of the stories, they give a bit more details about that. And in more historic times too, in the Middle Ages, for example, there were references to it there as well.
Okay, and do we have any description of what sort of games were happening at Aonach Tailteann?
Yeah, so, you know, there were certainly games that we would call sports, rasiacht, racing, all kinds of little, you know, combat sports like wrestling, umrascail, dornaliacht, boxing. I guess their equivalent of javelin and shot put, you know, throwing things, lifting things, carrying, racing, whatever they were doing, probably horse racing too, of course.
And possibly horse lifting as well. My father spent a lot of time in Ballahadreen and Roscommon when he was a child, and that's where his mother was from. And when there was a fair day or a market day, men used to compete at lifting horses. So they would get underneath the horse, try and get their arms around the front legs and lift the horse. So that sort of thing, the mind boggles, all sorts of things.
That is incredible. I've heard more about, like, often in a locale, on a fair day or in a day when people were celebrating like a pattern day, if it's a day for the patron saint or something, you'd often have people trying to lift the big rock. You know, there'd be a big rock on the hill, one particular rock, and all the men come along trying to lift it. So that would be contested. I hadn't heard of horse lifting though. That's
indeed.
You know, at least the rock can't push back at you.
Yeah, it is true. And of course, in Dunquain Fado, in Dunquain, West Kerry, there was a man called Pound, because he could lift a particular stone. And that's where he got his name from, if memory serves me rightly. Anava. So, funeral games now. These are things that took place at Aonach Tailteann. What is a funeral game?
Yeah, it sounds like something that shouldn't exist, funeral games, but in the ancient world, it's not unknown. And to again compare to Greece, I suppose we just have a lot of material from Greece. We have a lot of literature from ancient Greece. In the likes of the Iliad, Gamaleshka, by Homer, so the story of the Trojan War, there's descriptions of funeral games there. So whenever funerals taking place, you know, you're marking rites of passage, aren't you? So there were ceremonies and rituals, but part of those rituals in ancient Greece and in ancient Ireland were games and contests and so on. And versions of that continued way up to near modern times in Ireland. If you look on duchas.ie, which is the wonderful collection of folklore, Irish folklore online, there are references to funeral games and contests and things like that. So there was a bit of a funereal aspect to Tailteann as well. And I suppose part of that ties in to the mythological roots of the festival too. Now, whether the mythology came first or whether if the actual thing came first and then the stories were used to justify why we do this, hard to say, of course. But Tailteann, and this word Tailteann is said to come from a character from the ancient mythology, a woman called Tailteann. And Tailteann was a kind of queen of one of the earlier groups, the Fir Bolg, as we say. And she was the last queen of the Fir Bolg, and she was associated with agriculture. It said she cleared Ireland so that farming could begin. So there you go, the introduction of agriculture. But she ties in with another character that we've been talking a lot about at the moment, which is Lugh. And in fact, Tailteann was said to be the foster mother of Lugh, Maher Altrama Lugh. So that's a close bond. Like all great heroes, Lugh had a particularly tricky family background. He was prophesied to kill his grandfather, so his mother was locked away, and all of this kind of stuff, like in a lot of legends and myths. So Lugh actually grew up with Tailteann. And fosterage, of course, in historical terms and certainly in the stories as well, the mythologies, fosterage was very important, sending young children off to grow up in other homes to create those bonds and connections. Right into historical times, I think the Stuart kings of Scotland and then England as well still practiced it into the whichever century they were kings there. So Tailteann was this figure associated with agriculture, and as we know, Lugh is very much associated with the harvest, and Lúnasa is the beginning of the harvest season. So when Tailteann died, of course, Lugh was heartbroken, and it said that he himself founded these games. So maybe the name of the place comes from her name, or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe there was a place called Tailteann, and they thought, well, it must have been because of a lady called Tailteann. They could have gone that way as well.
And so you were saying to me earlier that, like the Olympiad, Aonach Tailteann, it didn't feature only feats of physical prowess. There was an element of sort of acliachtainne or mental athletics involved in it as well, poetry and maybe oration and this sort of thing.
Yeah, Aonach, singing, Tailteann music, recitals, things like that. So, yeah, we don't hear so much about it, but I believe even these days there's the cultural Olympiad too. But that would have been very much part of games and contests in Aonach Tailteann.
So a bit like Oireachtas na Gaeilge or Oireachtas na Saona. In that sense. So everything all wrapped up in one. Great.
Yeah.
Sounds like a good weekend. So talking about a good weekend, do we know how long Aonach Tailteann went on for in any given year?
Yeah, well, it's said that it went on until the Norman time. The Norman invasion of Ireland was in the 12th century, and I suppose over the following 100 years. And apparently that's when the Tailteann Games stopped. But I think they were revived at different times. It would have been a cultural memory of this important event in the Middle Ages. So there'd be references to that and things like matchmaking and, other kind of fair day events and so on like that. So people would turn up single and leave married or at least engaged. So that could happen to you if you weren't careful or if you're very lucky, maybe.
That's it. Yeah. So let's do in Varna as well.
Yeah.
So do we know how long it went on for? Was it a weekend? Was it a week or a month?
Yeah, it would be starting in mid-July. I think maybe a fortnight or a couple of weeks a week, something like that. But basically, it was very definitely placed at around this time of year, just in the run-up to Lúnasa. So although it's frustrating, we don't have all the info we would like to have. There's very clearly a link between agriculture, because it's this goddess associated with agriculture, and Lú, this character associated with the harvest. And it's that time of year, and it's not just this one festival, of course, in one place, but Lúnasa was an all-Ireland festival. That's the 1st of August. We still have a bank holiday for it now. So to have Lú tied into this story shows that it must have been a big event in Tailteann, and if they wanted to be significant, they would certainly tie a Lú into the story. He would make perfect sense for that. If he wasn't an intrinsic part of the story from the beginning. So yeah, very much late July into the Lúnasa period. Yeah.
Lovely. So where we're talking about the origins, as is so often the case, we kind of, when we go back far enough, we're reaching this place where Gaelitis folklore is kind of running into history, and we're looking at speculation as to which god founded what and what's named after what, or which order is it in. So what would be the earliest reference that we have to Tailteann? Do you know?
Well, as I said, there are references to Aonach Tailteann in some of the annals, but the annals themselves don't give a lot of information. Just like a line for any given year might just say that a certain battle was fought and somebody died and Aonach Tailteann was held. And you don't get a full report, sadly, of everything that went down and who got the gold medal. But the other source for some of the more interesting details is Leor Gola Éireann. So the Book of Invasions, it's often called. It's I think there are different versions of it out there, but you can certainly find it online. The Book of Invasions, that's in modern Irish there. You could see an old Irish version of it. But it's mythology, and it's kind of maybe the origin story of Ireland in a way, according to the mythologies. So the Book of Invasions, it was said there were, I can't remember, 4 or 5 different invasions or waves of people who came into Ireland. The first few waves died off again, and the latter couple of waves, you would have big battles between the old people established and the new people coming in. So this is where you get groups like the Fir Bolg, the Tailteann, and the last people coming in were the Gaels, of course. And when the Gaels came in, the Tailteann, apparently the deal they made was they said, we will take to the underground, we will go and live in the She, we will live in the mystical places. And the Gaels just became the normal Irish people living on the land. So this Book of Invasions gives you this huge rundown. And as part of that, we've got these stories of Lugh and Tailteann and Aonach Tailteann. So this is certainly an old Irish text. So it's from the first millennium AD. So old Irish period, maybe 800, 900 AD, something like that. So it's certainly very old, and it was a big part of the culture. You know, they needed to include this in their major works of literature.
Very good. And so just zooming up 1,000 years, what do you know about the modern revival of Aonach Tailteann? Did it take place in Tailteann, for instance? What form did these games take?
Yeah, I don't believe it particularly did, but yeah, obviously we would talk about the revival period, or Athioch na Gaeilge, and Ireland's cultural and literary revival at the end of the 19th century, start of the 20th century. I suppose it was the era of nationalism in general, so a lot of people were kind of rediscovering those things in different countries. But for, you know, certainly in Ireland, the cultural side, the language, there was a revival, the sport, the GAA, and these really did feed into the political independence movement and so on. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine people are aware, people are learning about this. There would have been a great drive, think, oh, can we not do this again? At the very same time, of course, is when the modern Olympics were being redeveloped. You know, I think, I'm not sure if, I think there were a lot of British people involved in that, but they always seem to love ancient Greek culture. But, you know, it was a similar kind of spirit of let's revive something from the old times. And I'm sure in Ireland, people were very aware of the Olympic, the modern Olympic culture, or that whole notion, the Olympic spirit or whatever. Mm-hmm. So they did eventually try to revive Aonach Tailteann, or the Tailteann mm-hmm. Games, the Olympic mm-hmm. Tailteann Games. That's when you start to hear the Tailteann Games, the focus on the games. So they took place, there were 3 instances where we had the Tailteann Games. It was 1924, 1928, and 1932. So these are the years of Sirstat na hÉireann, so the Irish Free State. So if you know your history, this is the period after the Easter Rising, the War of Independence, and the Civil War, where I suppose it was a kind of semi-independence had been won in the 26 counties. They were still technically part of the British Dominion, I think, part of the British Empire. And of course, the Civil War was fought because a lot of people didn't really want to accept that. They wanted proper independence. But the Sirstat period lasted until, I think, the 1940s was when the Republic was declared. So,
in Canada.
Sorry? Declared
in Canada.
In Canada.
I think that's where the original declaration took place.
I didn't hear that one. But of course, lots of Irish connections over there. But yeah, so the 20s, it's the early years of the Irish state. Okay. So there were a lot of movements to, you know, it's like nation building, I suppose you would have to say.
Yeah.
Like, which aspects, what do we want to put in? So I suppose, I'm not sure if the titles of Taoiseach and Taoiseach were first used there at that point. Could have been then or later, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
But for institutions, they wanted to make sure Irish language and old Irish culture was very much involved. And, you know, it's the same spirit that a few years later in the 30s led to the Irish folklore collection that I've mentioned a lot, and the school scheme in 1937, where they collected a lot of folklore through school children's homework.
Mm.
So it's that same kind of nation-building spirit that was there. And so they did establish the Tailteann Games. I'm not sure if everyone got together in Tailteann, County Meath itself. I saw some references to events taking place in Dublin, and, you know, just, I suppose, whichever were the normal sports venues, basically, maybe the Curragh for racing and so on. Not specifically based on Tailteann, sadly.
Yeah. It's the idea of it and the revival of it. It's hard to see a place for it right now. So we had the Celtic revival, and the GAA was the hurling football, but it was also to keep people fighting fit and ready for what was to come next, and that's endured. We have athletics in Ireland, of course. We have cultural celebration of song and dance and various other things at Oireachtas na Saona. So I wonder what form Aonach Tailteann might take if we were to revive it again. One thing I was thinking of was the Fiannaíocht. This is one of my, you can see this, one of my favourite books. It's a local one from Countraw or Fiontraw in West Kerry. And it's about the Fianna defending Ireland from, I think it depends what way you look. I think it might be the son of the King of the World or the son of the King of France. But invariably in these things, you have this gashgiecht where the heroes perform these amazing feats, you know. And the chap who illustrated this, Donal O'Brick, a friend of mine, when he was doing an exhibition of prints of the pictures, he wrote a little introduction to it, and he was saying that the Fiannaíocht was Ireland's Marvel or Ireland's Star Wars, you know, where these entertainment, it was exaggerated and these amazing things took place. So you have somebody, you know, going from one side of the beach to the other end, just juggling a slither, which is your little ball for hurling, from one foot to the other as he runs without dropping it. So sliding with one foot to the other, or hitting the ball from one end to the other end of the beach to catch it. So perhaps if we were to revive Aonach Tailteann, we could see how close people can get to performing these tasks. And our modern day heroes, see if they can approximate these amazing tasks in some sort of way. And it could be like, you know, these kind of costume events where people dress up as their favorite character from the Fianna.
Yeah, there could be a kind of revival or cosplay aspect to it. Yeah,
could be a bit of crack, because even Tailteann Games in West Kerry, not this year, but last year I think it was, they did a sort of reenactment of Coffee and Straw. Diarmuid Ling, for instance, ex-Wexford hurler, was part of that, and they were doing their best, you know, to get as close as they could to the gashgiecht of the original heroes, dressed up in costume that you'd speculate they might have worn.
That's it. You know, as you say, there was an attempt to revive the games, but it only lasted for three occasions, and 24, 28, and 1932 was the last one. What happened in 1932, again, if you know your history of Searstad Éireann, Fianna Fáil came into power for the first time, and they thought, well, that was the other crowd who were running that, so we don't want to have anything to do with it. So just politics, I think, at the end of the day. So there wasn't much of a desire for it, and then obviously later in the 30s and 40s, times were hard. And there have been other kind of attempts to reclaim the title for the last couple of years in GAA, the Gaelic Athletic Association. For the last few years in the Gaelic football, we've had a sort of secondary tier competition called the Tailteann Cup, Churn Tailteann. So the main cup that everybody wants to win, if you're a big competing county like Kerry and Tyrone and Galway, then and I have to mention Bellahatlia too, of course. But if you're competing for the top prize, it's the Sam Maguire Cup, Corn Vakir. But realistically, not every county is going to get a chance of winning that. So they created a secondary tier, and that's called the Tailteann Cup. So that's a way to keep a link with that. But all of the other festivals you mentioned, Ben, like Oireachtas na Gaeilge, Oireachtas na Saona, a big Aonach, what is it but an Aonach? When all the Gaelgory get together and there are competitions for literature, ceol, lots of things like that. That's a kind of Aonach Tailteann. We mentioned Listún Varna, of course, with his matchmaking. There are other traditions, other fairs which have old roots as well. So I'm not sure if we need to recreate the old one. I think it's just become all of these different versions of it, but they all in Ireland they all carry a little bit of that tradition in it. And even we mentioned the funeral games earlier. Obviously, I haven't been to a funeral where we've played games, but it's kind of a truism that Irish people know how to do death in a sense. We've got our wake funeral customs, and it's a big event, and people get together. And although it's always a sad time, there's always funny stories. There's always laughs to be had at a wake, and I don't think it's too much of a stretch to see a time when there were games played, and it's not so far back in history. So a lot of modern aspects of Irish life we can see connections, I guess, with these much older things.
Lovely. Okay, well, maybe it's not necessary, but I reckon Aonach Tailteann, sponsored by Red Bull, and people doing salmon leaps over shields, people running through the forest without breaking any twigs, people juggling balls between their two legs for half a mile, and dressing up in bear skins and wolf skins and such. Yeah.
Okay, I think you've got me convinced now, actually. Let's do it. Let's put a proposal out.
Tágama, Gurmil Niall, thanks for being with me. We'll leave it there.
Michael,
I hope you enjoyed our little chat, folks. And Tuarara, Dean Hiadorella, Slongafol. Take care, folks.
And hope you're enjoying the Olympiad. Slán.
Shinagadir. Bye-bye.
Transform your Irish language journey in 1 week. Take the Gaeilge Gach Lá 1 week challenge starting Monday. It doesn't matter if you're just starting off, coming back to Irish, or you're already an active learner. Go to challenge.irish or click the link in the description.